Imagine being told in the 1960s that one of the poorest, most rural nations on Earth would, in just a few decades, challenge the United States for global dominance. Sounds absurd, right? Yet that's exactly what happened with China. A country once plagued by famine and political chaos is now a world power setting the pace for technology, trade, and innovation. That kind of turnaround doesn't just break the rules of history, it rewrites them. Here's the paradox: while many in the West dismissed China as too big to modernize, it was precisely its size, discipline, and long-term strategy that fueled its rise. And here's the controversy: some see this rise as unstoppable progress, while others warn it's a ticking time bomb. Either way, ignoring it isn't an option. What happened in China affects your job, your investments, and even the phone in your pocket. Stick with me until the end, because by the time we're done, you'll not only understand how China went from Mao's failed experiments to becoming the engine of globalization, you'll see why its future could reshape your own. And if you've ever wondered whether the US can hold on to its lead, this story might just change the way you see the next decade. China's journey is one of those stories that almost feels like a myth when you look back at it. Not long ago, this country was primarily rural, its economy relying heavily on agriculture, and its global influence barely noticeable. Fast forward to today, and you've got the world's second-largest economy, shaping global markets, setting trends, and even challenging established superpowers. The transformation is so drastic that anyone studying international affairs must stop and ask, how did this nation pull it off? What makes the rise even more fascinating is the speed. In the span of a few decades, basically one lifetime, China went from being one of the poorest nations to lifting over 800 million people out of poverty, according to World Bank data. That's not just impressive, it's unprecedented in human history. Think about it, entire generations in the West have lived their whole lives without seeing that kind of dramatic upward shift, while in China, families saw it happen in a single generation. When people talk about this rise, they often focus on numbers: GDP growth, trade surpluses, foreign reserves. But to truly understand it, you've got to look beyond the stats. It's about vision, leadership, and the choices made at critical crossroads. From Mao's early experiments to Deng Xiaoping's bold reforms, every step built momentum. And here's the kicker: this wasn't just luck. It was strategy. And to really grasp it, we need to roll back the clock to Mao himself, the man who laid both the foundations and the roadblocks for what would come next. Mao Zedong's era is often remembered for its contradictions. On one hand, China under Mao struggled with devastating economic policies like the Great Leap Forward, which led to famine and immense human suffering. On the other, his leadership built the basic state infrastructure, centralized governance, nationalized industries, and a unified identity after years of war and fragmentation. Without these foundations, even flawed as they were, later leaders like Deng Xiaoping wouldn't have had a platform to reform. What's fascinating is that Mao's mistakes didn't erase his influence. While the economy stumbled, his focus on self-reliance planted the idea that China could stand apart from foreign domination. Think of it as a rough sketch on a blank canvas. It wasn't pretty, but it gave shape to something future leaders could refine. Even today, when the country talks about sovereignty and independence, that narrative echoes Mao's era. The economy paid a price, but the mindset of resilience stuck around. To understand this stage better, I recommend reading Mao, The Unknown Story, by Yung Chang and John Halliday. It offers a critical view, but it highlights just how much Mao shaped the early path of China's economy and identity. And here's where the story loops: despite the setbacks of collectivization and isolation, the groundwork of centralized control and national pride was laid. This would give Deng Xiaoping the space to swing the pendulum in a completely different direction, and that's where the real economic miracle begins. When Deng Xiaoping stepped in, he didn't try to erase Mao's legacy, he redirected it. His philosophy was simple but revolutionary: it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice. That line alone signaled a dramatic shift from ideology to pragmatism. Deng opened the door to a mixed economy, allowing market mechanisms to coexist with state control. For ordinary Chinese families, this meant opportunities that had been unimaginable just a decade earlier. One of his boldest moves was the creation of special economic zones, starting in places like Shenzhen. These zones acted like experimental labs where China invited foreign investment, relaxed regulations, and let capitalism breathe within a socialist framework. The results were staggering. Shenzhen grew from a fishing village in the 1980s to a megacity of more than 12 million people today. Investors who once overlooked China now lined up, attracted by cheap labor and favorable policies. For anyone interested in studying this turning point, books like Ezra Vogel's Deng Xiaoping and the Transformation of China give an insider's view of how deliberate and calculated these reforms were. And here's the fascinating loop: Deng never abandoned the Communist Party's grip, he balanced openness with control. This delicate balance would set the stage for China's industrialization and its leap into globalization, a phase that would soon turn the country into the so-called factory of the world. By the 1990s, China had become a giant construction site. Skyscrapers rose almost overnight, highways stretched across provinces, and cities swelled as millions of workers migrated from the countryside. This industrialization didn't just provide jobs, it reshaped the entire economy. Factories churned out textiles, electronics, toys, and machinery at a scale the world had never seen before. Suddenly, the label, "Made in China," wasn't just common, it was everywhere, symbolizing the country's deep integration into global trade. A pivotal moment came in 2001, when China officially joined the WTO. This was the stamp of approval that legitimized its entry into the global economy. Exports skyrocketed, foreign investment poured in, and the country's GDP growth consistently hovered near double digits for years. Imagine this: between 2000 and 2010, China's share of global manufacturing more than doubled, making it the undisputed factory of the world. Urbanization went hand in hand with this boom. Cities like Shanghai and Beijing transformed into global hubs practically overnight. If you were an investor at that time, betting on Chinese manufacturing companies or even infrastructure-related industries would have been like catching a rocket ride. And yet, this wasn't just about cheap labor. China's leaders reinvested profits into infrastructure, education, and technology, building the muscle needed for the next phase. And that's the loop. Once industrialization secured China's place in globalization, the focus began to shift, away from being the world's workshop and toward becoming a hub of innovation and global influence. China knew it couldn't stay the factory of the world forever. Low-cost labor was an advantage, sure, but it wouldn't last. So, the leadership doubled down on innovation and technology. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen the rise of companies like Huawei, Tencent, and Alibaba, firms that don't just copy, but compete head-to-head with Western giants. In 2020 alone, China filed more international patents than any other country, a clear sign that the economy was shifting gears. This push wasn't confined to the digital sphere. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China extended its influence far beyond Asia, investing in infrastructure projects across Africa, Europe, and Latin America. It wasn't just about building railways and ports, it was about weaving a global network with China at the center. For many developing nations, Chinese loans and expertise filled gaps left by Western hesitation, and that bought Beijing considerable leverage on the world stage. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. When you walk through cities like Shenzhen today, it feels less like visiting an industrial hub and more like stepping into the future. Cashless payments, 5G coverage, AI applications, it's all baked into daily life. And yet, this rise in technology and global influence doesn't mean smooth sailing. Every leap forward brought new challenges, and those challenges are shaping the next phase of China's journey, the uncertain, tension-filled road ahead. For all its achievements, China's path forward isn't without bumps. Domestically, the economy faces slowing growth, an aging population, and rising debt. The property market crisis in recent years, with giants like Evergrande making headlines, shows how fragile certain parts of the system can be. Add to that environmental concerns, pollution, water scarcity, and reliance on coal, and it becomes clear that sustaining growth won't be as straightforward as in the past. Externally, tensions with the United States and other Western nations are shaping a new geopolitical climate. Trade wars, technological bans, and disputes over Taiwan have turned into flashpoints that could slow China's rise. At the same time, competition in technology, semiconductors, green energy, has become the new battlefield. These aren't just economic issues, they tie directly into questions of national security and global dominance. Investors and policymakers alike are watching these battles closely, since the outcomes could reshape the world economy. Yet, many experts believe China still has the potential to surpass the US as the largest economy, perhaps within the next decade or two. The sheer size of its market, combined with ongoing investments in innovation, keeps that possibility alive. The question isn't just whether China will get there, it's what kind of world power it will be when it does. And that, right there, is what makes its future not just important for economists or politicians, but for anyone trying to understand the trajectory of the global economy. So, what does China's story teach us? That no rise to power is ever smooth, and no economy is immune to challenges. From Mao's experiments to Deng's reforms, from industrialization to today's innovation race, the path has been full of risks, bold bets, and unexpected turns. And yet, the results are undeniable. China transformed not only itself but the entire global economy. The real question is, what does this mean for you? Will China surpass the US in your lifetime? Will its focus on technology and globalization create opportunities or threats for your career, your business, or your investments? And how will global tensions reshape the world order you live in every single day? If you found this breakdown valuable, don't just leave it here, apply it. Read deeper, stay informed, and start looking at global trends with fresh eyes. And of course, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Because understanding the world's biggest shifts isn't just interesting, it's the edge you need to stay ahead.